Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to this fifth or next to last lecture in our series on a survey of Western Hemisphere archaeology. Today we have Dr. Keith Ashley to talk about the Mississippian world and its Florida connections, the Mill Cove complex, where he has been for some years now excavating on private property, thanks to the generosity of the property owners. Dr. Ashley joins us today from the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, where he's an associate professor of anthropology and director of the University Anthropology Laboratory. Keith is a native of North Florida and naturally comes by his interest in ancient peoples of this region and the Southeast US in general. His field projects have ranged from 4,000-year-old shell middens along the Gulf Coast to 17th century Creek Indian villages in Alabama. And incidentally, he had his undergraduate work at Auburn. I can't imagine why. His current work focuses on the hunter-gatherer peoples of Northeast Florida and their relationship to the farming settlements of the Southeast during the period 900 to 1300 CE, or current era. At that time, elements of the sophisticated Mississippian culture centered along the Mississippi River had spread through Central and Southeastern North America. Mississippian, because it was relatively recent, has left us with a lot of cultural artifacts, including at this site in the Jacksonville area. Within the UNF Anthropology Lab, Professor Ashley trains students for fieldwork and hands-on laboratory analysis, preparing them for a career in archaeology. And I note that he is accompanied today by his student Victoria, who is planning to start her master's program here at UF next fall. He took his PhD from UF and a master's from FSU. His latest book publication is Late Prehistoric Florida, Archaeology on the Edge of the Mississippian World, which he co-edited. Dr. Ashley.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, thank you for letting me be here. I seem to be a little hoarse, so hopefully everyone can hear me. I talk loud, so I want to make sure that I'm far enough back. Everyone good back there? Okay, so what I want to talk about is the research that we are doing at the University of North Florida. So everyone knows University of North Florida is in Jacksonville, right? So so this is the site right here. So we've been working on this really off and on since about 1999. So I want to talk about what we've been doing there, what we've been finding, but also I want to start out by kind of contextualizing where we are, okay? The bigger picture. So while we're looking at a site in Jacksonville, Florida, let's look at the world that the indigenous people 1,000 years ago kind of knew about, all right? So this is it. Let's take a look at the southeastern United States. We call this the Mississippian world, okay? This is a term that we as archaeologists are imposing on the past. So if you see that kind of yellow line there, that's kind of outlining or demarcating what we call the Mississippian world. So when we use the word Mississippian, sometimes we use it as a time period, like the Mississippian period, roughly 1000 to 1500 AD, sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a little later, depending on the researcher, okay? It's also known as a culture because there's these constellation of features that they all broadly share within this region, such as platform mounds, agriculture, these long distance interaction networks. All right, so there's constellation of things that they all kind of share. They're a little different, but they share those, so they're called Mississippian. All right, so those outside of that yellow line are kind of considered to be outside the Mississippian world. So what you can see here is that the place that I'm going to talk about, the Mill Cove complex, is situated on the edge of this Mississippian world. All right, so really the 10th century, I think, really marks this really radical turning point in the indigenous history of the Southeastern United States. What we see happening about this time is this major mega center called Cahokia is going to emerge. In its wake, there's going to be smaller kind of mound center polities. sometimes anthropologists, archaeologists call these chiefdoms. So we see these smaller ones emerging, right? Then what we start to see is a lot of groups start to adopt agriculture, primarily farming, okay, maize farming. Not all of them, but we see this becoming a common trend. And the other thing that happens at this point in time is this reanimation of these long distance exchange networks. They had been kind of dormant for the last few centuries, but all of a sudden they are going to take off again. And what we're going to see during the Mississippian period is this incredible flow of exotic materials from galena and copper and mica and various minerals and stones, shells from the coast, all over the place, whether or not they're in their raw form or in the form of finished products. All right. Cahokia. Cahokia is really important. Cahokia is like the New York City of 1,000 years ago. This is probably the preeminent indigenous community in the southeastern United States. All right. It's really unparalleled in terms of its size, its socio-political complexity, all these things that kind of come together. So what happens with Cahokia, they call it the Big Bang. It emerges all of a sudden, really fast. And there seems to be this movement of people. It becomes like a magnet. And there's movements of people from the upper Mississippi River Valley, from the lower Mississippi River Valley, from the Ohio River Valleys. They all kind of come in and converge into this Cahokia. All right. So this is in the East St. Louis area. So it straddles both sides of the Mississippi River. Great floodplain. It's called the American Bottoms. It's where the really, really incredibly fertile grounds between the Mississippi River and the Missouri River come together. So it creates this great area for farming. So we got corn, beans, and squash that are being grown at this time. It's creating these incredible surpluses. All right. So corn is really reliable. It's storable. It's creating these huge surpluses. These surpluses are feeding large numbers of people, right? They're able to use that to kind of fund craft specialization or sport craft specialization. Just kind of use it to aid in any kind of risk aversion when things go bad. They have something to rely on. And then we'll start to see it co-opted by individuals, elites, leaders who are going to use this surplus really to pursue their own kind of personal agendas. All right. So this is kind of where it is. So when you have Cahokia, how many people have heard of Cahokia? If you're into Cahokia, incredible. You got to go there. If you haven't, go to Cahokia. It's great. So Cahokia is on the Illinois side. On the Missouri side would be the St. Louis Mound Complex. So at one point in time, there were these three kind of centers, okay, that consisting of various mounds. So we're looking at probably, I think this is close to 200 mounds at one time, right? With Cahokia itself and Illinois having the most. But these three centers are probably articulating together both socially, economically, politically. So this is a massive, massive community that's going on here, right? Bringing in lots of people. That said that the kind of population numbers kind of fluctuate and people change, but there's probably 25 to 50,000 people in its heyday that are going to be kind of either affiliating with or routinely coming to Cahokia, right? So this is massive. It's larger than London at the time. This is the largest population in the United States until Philadelphia in the 1800s. So a massive, massive place. This is it. So a lot of people don't know about it, that it was in St. Louis. Most of the ones in St. Louis were razed. Okay, they took them down, they tore them down. So these are gone. Most of the ones are gone to St. Louis, Missouri, probably by the 1870s and 1880s. All right. So we kind of lose them from the landscape. So what we see today pales into comparison what was once there. So the political influence, the social influence, the religious influence of Cahokia really is going to spread across the eastern United States. Some people say that the Mississippian culture was kind of born along the Mississippi River, possibly even at Cahokia, and it kind of spreads out from there. Okay. So basically it provides the spark, even though those local regions kind of lit their own fires from that spark. All right. So that's what's going on at the broader scale, right? You got Cahokia, then all of a sudden you go to these smaller kind of become chiefdoms. Okay. Some people like the word, some people don't, but basically this is a polity in which there are multiple communities, multiple villages there, and they're basically formally organized. There's a hierarchy to it. There's social inequality. There are elite leaders within them. And so you see smaller versions of this popping up throughout the Southeast in different river valleys. Okay. So what's going on in Florida at this time? Okay. Let's say we look across the state of Florida 1,000 years ago, right? And what would we see? We will see two major mound centers, civic ceremonial centers in Florida that really stand out with regard to connections to the Mississippian world. There are others throughout the state, but at this point in time, two of them really stand out. And we measure that by the amount of exotic material that these sites have that are coming from the interior United States. And the two of them are going to be surprising. They're both along the St. Johns River, and they're both occupied by fisher hunter-gatherers. Okay, these aren't farmers. They're living off the land. They're reaping the bounties of these great fish surpluses, whether along the St. Johns River and the Mount Royal site, which is immediately north of Lake George near Willatka, Florida, right? And then you got to the mouth, and that's the Mill Cove complex. Okay, this is in Jacksonville. It's about 10 miles from the mouth of the St. Johns River. These two sites basically have more exotic materials 1,000 years ago than anywhere else in Florida. They are actively involved in what's going on. They're on the vanguard of these exchange relationships between groups in Florida and groups throughout the Mississippian world, including Cahokia. So what we're going to have is a bunch of fisher hunter-gatherers who are going to start to bring in this incredible array of these exotic materials. All right. That's a spatulate shell. I'll show it again. This is a copper, either breastplate or headdress plate that came from Mount Royal. And these were found in the 1890s. All right. Again, so the fisher folks, shellfish collectors. Okay. That's their major economy. That's what's driving their subsistence and their everyday kind of life. All right. So this is where we're working. It's the Mill Cove complex. All right. We've been working here at the University of North Florida in the Archaeology lab. I think we started this when I was working on my dissertation here at the University of Florida back in 99. And we've been doing it from 99 to about 2004. I went off to school somewhere else to teach for a while. I came back to the University of North Florida. So we've been actively out there since 2012, pretty much every January. And in fact, we're out there right now. So we'll be out there trying to wrap things up tomorrow. All right. So in terms of the time period I'm talking about, the Mississippian, our local version in Northeastern Florida, the term we use for it is called St. John's 2. So St. John's 2 is kind of early in that Mississippian period. All right. We have really good dates on the site. I can say now we can probably tweak this. We're probably looking at about 930 to maybe 1300. So we're using some Bayesian statistics to try to refine this date. So we can probably say maybe 930, 1300. So we have probably close now to 70 radiocarbon dates from 17 different sites. So I think we have a really good handle on that broad date of what's going on. And this is roughly contemporaneous, really overlapping really well with Cahokia and some of the other major mound centers within the Eastern United States. Now, we are really focusing on Mill Cove, but one of the things we want to do is we don't want to take this myopic view. We don't want to focus on just the best site that's out there. We want to understand St. John's 2 culture, St. John's 2 way of life in Northeastern Florida. I mean, we want to understand all the settlements that are there. There are larger communities with civic ceremonial centers or burial mounds. Also, there's smaller resource procurement sites that are kind of throughout the area. How do all these articulate throughout the year? Where are their pilgrimage sites? We really want to understand them all. So we go out there and excavate other sites as well. So we're really trying to get a handle on that. Again, fisher folks, shellfish collectors, not farmers. We're finding no corn here. We do end up finding corn in Northeastern Florida at the sites we work on, not this site, but we don't see corn in Northeastern Florida until about 1450, 1500. It's much, much later in time. All right. And our research is multi-scalar. Okay. And what I mean by that is we want to understand St. John's 2 indigenous way of life in Northeastern Florida, just locally. What is it like locally? Then let's open that up a little more. What's it like regionally? How are those groups there interacting with the other groups along the St. Johns River or just into Georgia? Then we want to open that scale even more and look at them in terms of a worldview. Now, it's not a global world at this time, but it's a world that they know of that stretches over much of Eastern North America. And that's what we're looking at as well. So we're trying to tack back and forth between these different scales of analysis. And what you're going to see here is that the groups here at this point in time, they are establishing contacts, they are forming alliances with nearby neighbors, but also with people great distance away. All right. So what this means is there's this constant flow of information and non-local materials that are coming into this area, meaning that they are not isolated from the developments and events that are going on in that Mississippian world. Okay. So just because they're on the periphery of it, just because they're not farming, doesn't mean that they're not actively involved in knowing what's going on and participating within that. All right. So this is just kind of giving you a look here of the area. It's right here, mouth of the St. John River, right here. If you're familiar with this, if you've ever come to Jacksonville, we have a bridge here called the Dames Point Bridge. This area, this is Mill Cove. All right, so that's that large embayment within there. And this used to be an incredible fisheries. At the turn of the century, at the turn of the 20th century, what we see is there were these large communities, there's African-American communities, other fishing communities were on there. It was supposed to be this incredibly 17 feet deep, great waters, people would come and fish. In the 40s and 50s, Ted Williams, students, I tell that students to go, who? Ted Williams would fish there, and Hemingway, they would fish there. So this was a great place. The problem is Jacksonville rechanneled everything, dredged everything. So what was this great fisheries now has become dredged in. So it's this mucky 3 feet deep kind of soil. But that would have really attracted them. That would have been really their bread and butter. What they were eating on a daily basis is lots and lots of fish. All right. So that's where it is. So those red dots is where I'm talking about. The other blue ones are sites that are contemporaneous within that 930, 1300 time period. Okay. So these are ones that are kind of forming this broader kind of regional community. All right. And so again, we didn't want to just draw all of our information from the two red dots. So we're out there right now hitting all of these. In fact, Victoria's student here, we're out at this one right here, right there. So that's Black Hammock Island. That's where we're going to have our summer field school. So we're trying to get more information from that one there. Okay, we've just been out at this one here just a few months ago. So we're kind of all over the board. We don't have a graduate program at UNF, but I think we're really active in the archaeology, the local archaeology that's there. And I got these great students that I work with. This is LIDAR. So if you're familiar with LIDAR, LIDAR basically is taken from a plane or a satellite. It's from plane, and it shoots down a little laser and it bounces back and gives three-dimensional information. So this is providing kind of a contour map. So this is modern. So you can see where the streets are, you know, neighborhood cul-de-sacs, you can actually see houses. But even on this modern landscape, you can still see parts of the Mill Cove complex. And what Mill Cove complex consisted of were two incredibly large mounds. Okay, these are earthworks. This is architecture that was built by the indigenous people. One of them is called the Grant Mound, which is right here at the end of a cul-de-sac. The other one is called the Shields Mound. It has a really unique shape to it. Can you see it not just stand out on here? Here's the main part of the mound. It's got like this fish hook projection. It's got a little, see a little berm there and another one there. These were both excavated by this guy named Clarence B. Moore in the 1890s. He came throughout the southeastern United States for about a 25 year period and would dig Indian mounds. And he dug both of these and found lots and lots of materials. When he was there, okay, those little berms, they continued. They've been erased since then. So what you had was the mound, that little fish hut, two little earthen berms that would have led to a pond. That pond has since been modified, so it's not the exact shape. So this was really a piece of created artwork. I mean, architecture. It was great. So he excavated these mounds, and here's a drawing that he did in 1895 of the Grant Mound. Okay, it's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but you see how you have these little hobbits here, you know, little tiny people there in the mound. At that point in time, he says, hey, a lot of this mound is already eroding into the river. So this one was set right on the bluff. These are high bluffs. This is a really unusual area in Jacksonville. These are old beach dunes. This is an old relic, millions of year old beach, kind of a rolling dune field. So what you have is all this undulating topography that's different. And they're going to build these two mounds on the two highest points. So the two highest natural points, they're grafting onto those. So we have the Grant Mound here, and here's the Shields Mound. So what we see he did is that he, in 1895, he hired engineers from Mayport to draw the mound. And they did a really incredibly good job. Here's the main part of the mound. Here's the little ramp. And here's this like fish hook projection. Here's the ravine right here. And you can see where the things are coming off. He draws the rest of it that's off this map. And so we got a nice map. We see it on the landscape today. When he excavated these mounds, we don't do this anymore. So we do not dig into any mounds. Nothing that we're doing out there today is in the mounds or trying to involve any human remains. So what we want to do is, hey, We know a lot of the stuff that he found in the mounds. We know a lot of about those kind of things. What's going on with where are the people living in this community? What is their daily life like? You know, what is their ceremonial life like? Let's find out what's going on. So that really kind of required us to start asking landowners if we could excavate in their yard. All right. Before I do that, let me show you some of the materials that were taken from the mound in the 1890s. Okay. That red square, that's basically where we're focusing on in terms of the archaeology. Most of this area in here is heavily developed now. It is in 1990, they started building residential communities, really close together houses, kind of cookie cut, kind of looking neighborhoods. Where we are in that little square, they own the house on the river and these long linear lots with no development. So it's great for archaeology. And the 5 landowners have been fantastic. They've allowed us to go out there and basically excavate on the property. They've conveyed all the artifacts to the University of North Florida. So we have control of everything that's kind of going on out there. So these are some of the things in the mound. I'm gonna give you just a small sample of what was done. These are called celts. So these would have been made out of diorite or basalt, greenstone. These are coming from the Appalachian Mountains. This is another one here. So what I'm mainly going to be showing are line drawings because we don't show the originals anymore. So these are line drawings. So this would have been a celt made out of the similar material that probably was some sort of baton or some sort of status symbol for elites and chiefs within the interior Mississippian world. So there's only been a handful of these found in Florida. I think 2 or 3 of them in Mount Royal, 2 of them where we're working at in the mound, and then another one found throughout the state. So they're really limited in their distribution in Florida, but we have one in our area. This is copper. All right, so this is sheet copper. Most of this is going to be cold hammered, so they're taking the little nuggets, they're taking the pieces, and they're just cold hammering them, maybe a little heating, but not any annealing or melting, and just hammering down to these thin sheets. And then with the thin sheets, they may do repose or embossing to create these kind of raised designs on them, okay? Or they may just use them as foil, and they'll make something locally out of shell or out of wood or out of bone, and then use that copper to kind of wrap around as foil. So these really would stand out. So what you have here on the left are these little plates here that were probably either headdress pieces or some sort of dangles on some sort of ritual paraphernalia. But these are not local. The middle one are actually wooden cones, right? And they're wrapped in copper. So kids today would call them gauges, ear gauges. They would go with a big hole in their ear, and these would have been worn in the ears. The other one, this is the long-nosed god mask. So it has this little slit here, and there's a long nose. There were 2 of them. This one here, the long nose is broken. And I'll show you a reproduction in a little while. These are about this big. And so they would have been worn in the ears. There have only been 7 pairs of these in copper found in all of North America. So we have a bunch of fisher folks, shellfish collectors in Jacksonville, Florida, who have acquired these. And the consensus is among all researchers, these are being produced in Cahokia. And I'll show you a map that kind of shows their distribution. All right, so what it is they're getting these nuggets. They're kind of hammering, they're hammering them into these little shapes, right? So far, we've had about 23 of them that have been sourced, okay, from the Grant Mound and Mount Royal. So these are the 2 big areas that I was talking about in Florida. And you can see that most of them, the sourcing is linking it to the Appalachian Mountains. But we do have some that's coming from Lake Superior, and we do have some that is actually coming from float copper in Wisconsin. So this stuff is really coming from a great distance away. Right now, we have about 15 pieces that we found at the University of North Florida, and they're currently at the nuclear reactor at the University of Missouri, and we're trying to get trace element analysis to link where they're coming from. They're probably going to match or parallel this, but we're not sure. So we got that. So it's going to be some exciting new information we'll have coming out probably in the next few months. All right. So here we are again, Grant and Shields Mound. So this is more of a LiDAR that's more LiDAR derived. So it's 2-dimensional. But again, you can see there's Grant Mound. Again, you can see this is where the Shields Mound are. The 2 burial mounds, these large pieces of architecture. One of the areas we're going to focus on, I'm going to talk about, is that little dot is called Kinsey's Knoll. It's about 30 to 50 meters from the Shields Mound. Okay. And I'll get to that in a couple of minutes, but just kind of keep that in mind. It's within the shadow of the Shields Mound, and it's a really special area. So what we see here is probably a large community bookend by two mounds, the Grant Mound and Shields Mound, in between our various kind of residential areas that we still don't have a great handle on because a lot of that area has been destroyed. And then we also have these specialized middens or ritual middens, kind of ritual garbage areas. Okay, we also have our earthen embankments that lead to that pond. All right, so this has been a crafted landscape. They are actually choosing an area with this really unique natural rolling topography, and then they're grafting on to that. All right, so this is what we have here. So what you can see here we've superimposed where the mound is, and these are where the houses are within the 5 lots that we've been working on. So again, this is great for archaeologists. They've got some houses up near the river, a little bit of disturbance, but most of their properties are really open and free of disturbance. So we can do a lot of archaeology. All right. So this is it today. So here I have Earth Google, right? And the little light, but can you see the little kind of yellowish orange dots? Those represents where we dug small little exploratory shovel tests. And you can see examples of them here. They're 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter square, all right? You guys are probably familiar with this, but in American archaeology, we used a metric system. I think archaeologists in the 70s converted because they thought everyone else was converting, but nobody followed us, but we continued to press on. So it's easier. So 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters, 1.5 foot squares. We screen them, we get all the information, and we analyze them. We look at distributional patterns and so forth. So we have about 110 of these that we've done. And a lot of times we had a little bit of freedom where to put them. Other times the landowner would say, hey, you don't want to dig there, that's our septic field, or you don't want to dig there, that's my rose garden. So we'd really kind of take their lead, but we got some tests out here to give us an idea of what's out here. Okay, here's the mound. We know what's there. We know that what was found there in the 1890s. We want to get a better idea of what's around the mound. Okay, and that's what we're doing here in our initial stages. Don't get overwhelmed by this map. It's just kind of showing you after we did those shovel tested, really, you can't tell much in a square that's this big, right? So we thought we need to go to those areas that are really productive in terms of those shovel tests and open them even bigger, right? So that's what we've done. So we've opened up excavation areas. So now our kind of smallest unit is 1 meter by 2 meters, 3 feet by 6 feet. But typically we cobble those together to open up larger blocks so we can start seeing what's going on. Can we see any features out there? Can we see anything that's related, posts that are related to structures or buildings? Can we see any types of pits? So we've opened these really much bigger areas, and we're looking at 13 kind of different areas here. So that's just the names for them. So, and we have lots of great information on each one of those areas. So that's what we're trying to build upon here. All right. So what I'm going to show you here is just kind of looking at a couple of them so you can get an idea of what the landscape looks like, what we're kind of dealing with in terms of people's yard. I also like to show off students that are working. So this is the mound. This is going to be this Kinsey's Knoll. This is our kind of far kind of northwestern area. So we've been digging right here adjacent to a house. Here we're digging in some of these little patch of orange trees that are there. So again, we're starting out with our little 1 by 2 meter units. We're expanding them, trying to make them a little bit larger. We're finding lots of stuff, lots of artifacts, animal bone, other types of things that are going on that I'll discuss shortly. So this is kind of where things are going here. Then we've done some stuff right there along the bluff. And in some of these areas, this is a nice bluff. This is a 10, 15, 20-foot bluff, which is really incredible for the Jacksonville area. So we're out there again. Here we have a series of units put together to expose this. So what we have in this area, you saw that darker soil. This was kind of a lower area where they had filled it in with natural fill. So that somebody in the 1960s had filled it in. So we dug through that fill, got to the original ground surface, and we started getting these really large pits here. So you can see it in profile. So that's kind of half of it. You can see it going down. A lot of it's filled with oyster shell, and then it goes down to the bottom, full of all great kind of stuff within it we'll talk about. All right. And then we have another area. So then there was this little ramp-like feature. So we thought we would sample that. So here we wanted to do more of a trench. So here students would come in across and cutting a trench through it to get a nice little cross-section profile. Can we tell what's going on? And what we have is this layer, can you see this layer of oyster shell? This is incredibly clean oyster shell. There's really hardly any artifacts in there. We think this is more architectural, that they're laying this down as kind of a foundation or a covering for a ramp that they're building in this area. Also, you can see that the modern landscape is there. We have PVC piping that we've encountered. And also a couple of these, one here, a couple of the sherds that were in there, we think that this stuff was mined from the bluff, that this was shellmen that was on the bluff that had fallen off the bluff. They went down and picked that clean sand up because a couple of the big sherds that were in there actually had oysters adhering to them. So we think they're mining that for more architectural fill. In other areas, when we have all this shell, it's simply garbage that's going on. So we see them using shell both for architecture as well as using it for food. And this is where we currently are working now. So this is right here adjacent to the mound. We call this South Field. So here again, you can see these really thick deposits of shell. This shell would not naturally be here. All right, this shell is the byproduct of them throwing away. This is refuse here. All right. One thing you're going to see here with regards to the shell, when we have lots of shell like that and it's garbage, they're also throwing away broken pieces of pottery, other types of discarded artifacts, but they're also throwing away lots and lots of animal bone relating to the fish that they're filleting or for the deer that they're butchering. So it's going in there. What's great is when it rains, all that calcium leaches out, right? And the bones absorb it. So we're getting 1,000-year-old animal bone that preserved. Doesn't do it to the wood, but the bone does. So we have this great, great collection of animal bone letting us know what they're eating in different areas of the site. And again, here's another pit. So you can see this little pit that's coming down. We've taken half of it out. The rest of it is going into the wall. You can see all the shell that we're finding as we're taking these things out. So we have all this great information that's kind of coming out of here. So this was just last week. So Victoria is one of my students right here, who's going to be going to the University of Florida for a PhD. We're down in these really deep pits trying to get through the shell, get all this great information that's out of there. So now we're through the shell mid, we're down to that kind of yellowish, light yellow brown sand. We're into sterile soil. So there's nothing else after this point in time. So we usually stop about this level. Once we get into this yellow brown, get a couple levels into it, we're clearly out of it, then we can stop digging. All right. All right. So Kinsey's Knoll, this is probably the best area I've ever excavated in the Jacksonville area. So again, we talked about all these kind of peripheral areas that we've excavated, right? So now what we have here is about 50 meters from the Shields Mound. And what we're going to see here is spectacular. The volume of animal bone, the types and sizes of artifacts is incredible. It's really different. The garbage this is ritual garbage. This is different than we're finding in other areas of the site or we're finding at other sites kind of in the region. So we think this is a location where they're probably preparing bodies for the mound. They're building ritual, making ritual artifacts, ritual paraphernalia. They're feasting, they're having ceremonies. So this is a specialized district within the community. All right. So this starts out at the center of it is probably about 3 feet of solid shell. Again, discarded shell, but millions and millions and millions of pieces of animal bone, primarily fish, but all these other kind of exotic kind of animals, at least exotic from the standpoint of what we usually find. All types of artifacts, from everyday artifacts to materials that are coming from far-flung areas of the Southeast United States. Some of the things that we're finding here are bits and pieces of things that were recovered in the mound, suggesting that they're actually starting to maybe make some of these things, modify some of these things, utilize some of these things in rituals and ceremonies. All right. Again, we're getting these large pits. So we get these really large pits at the base here. So there have a lot of things that are going on. These are probably processing pits, storage pits that later they'll throw away kind of ritual garbage into them, but they stand out really, really clearly. They're great. They're really crisp. They're clear. Again, we had to dig through a sprinkler system to get to this one. This area right here is just an area of incredible burning. Something here burned down. I think it was probably some sort of structure that burned down. So you can see the shell, but below that shell is all this area of carbonized wood and other types of material. And then in some areas within this, we're getting these pockets of this great red hematite impregnated sand. So we think they're processing hematite here. So hematite is ochre. It's an iron oxide. They take it and they crush it down. One thing that we know, when he excavated the nearby mound, he would say in his notes, I know I'm going to encounter a human interment because there's red soil. So they would take this and process and probably use this red soil to lie underneath burials or lie over the top of burials. And here we think they're processing this material. We see this residue on a lot of the pottery, suggesting that it's inside these pots and they're crushing it and they're working it. We have certain types of pieces of rock that we can see it kind of in the crevices. So they're just pounding this stuff. So we think that they're preparing the sands for the burial mound as well here. Some of the really kind of spectacular things we're finding in Kenzie's Knoll is we're finding lots of these pins. These are bone pins. So these are long bones to deer, either cannon bones, tibias, and so forth. A lot of them are probably hairpins, okay? So we don't see a lot of work on the edges of them, but can you see the little like ladder designs here? So they're really incised with all different kind of designs on them. Sometimes we'll see a black pitch on them as well. So these may have been to hold up top knot hair or used to hold feathers and things along those lines. This here's another incredible find. This is also a large, probably a deer bone, and they're carving this, they're incising this. And what we see here are these three eye motifs. So this is the obverse and reverse side, the front and back of the same thing. So if we flip it over, that's what we see. And so what we see here are these three eye symbols. And sometimes the eye can represent the world. And in Southeastern cosmology, there are three worlds. There's this world, the upper world, and the lower world. And the three worlds are held together by four cosmic cords. So could this represent the three worlds? And could these ladders represent the cosmic cords? So it's kind of a thought-provoking possibility that's here, but this is really a unusual piece. This is probably going to be some sort of wind instrument. So we can see the holes that are drilled here, all this incising, again, a deer cannon bone, all this great stuff. We have 2 or 3 more of these elsewhere on Kenzie's Knoll, suggesting that maybe we have some sort of wind instruments. Again, more incised bone. Sometimes I think they're burning the bone because when it burns, it gives it much more of a polish. Some of these instances where they incise them, they're taking that red ochre and they're pushing it, jamming it into those grooves, into the incisions there to give it that red color. So it really pops when you see it. And you can see that here. And we see it in a lot of them. Sometimes it's real faint because it's probably just come out over the years. Again, more incising here, modified dolphin teeth. We're getting great shark teeth, both fossilized shark teeth and non-fossilized shark teeth. This one right here is probably this, I mean, it is tiny. It's just incredible that they were able to drill that all the way through without cracking it. So it's really great. We have great white shark there. We have sand shark. We have really different sharks there. So we're getting them with the roots drilled. We're getting them drilling through the enamel. We're getting others that show birotational wear. So they're probably using them in this fashion where they're going back and forth and back and forth. So we have great work there on those. Then we're getting shell. Shell's local. So shell is probably one of the big things that's going out of here, right? But they're using it locally here. So we see these whelk shells. This is the left-handed lightning whelk, which tends to have more spiritual symbolism because of the directionality of the spiral. The other one is a right-handed whelk, which goes in a clockwise direction. This goes in a counterclockwise direction, the spiral, which basically replicates the east to west movement of the sun. So whenever you see gorgets or you see shell cups that are made out of whelk, it is always the left-handed whelk. The right-handed whelk is a little more robust, and they use that, but they tend to use that for more utilitarian types of functions. So we see these Kalyan mallet using for gouges. We see these disc shells in which we have a perforation here. We see lots and lots of shell beads, whether it's tubular or these larger disc beads or the small disc beads and barrel beads. The vast majority are made out of whelks, either out of the outer world. They break it up into small little squares, drill it, and then grind it down to the circle form. And then we have them here. So we get these in large numbers, and these are definitely locally made. We don't have stone in our area. Any stone that we wanted to get in northeastern Florida, they're probably having to come to the Gainesville area, to the Swanee River area. That's where the solidified limestone is closest to the surface. Here in Florida, where Jacksonville, where we have it, it is deeply buried. There's no way to get to it. So they're having to get it in other areas, either by going directly to those areas or by interacting and trading with people that are from those areas. So we have these smaller ones down here. These are your true arrowheads. So we have large numbers of these for the Jacksonville area. This is producing more of these than any other site in the Jacksonville area dating to this time period. But what we're also getting are older projectile points. These projectile points are thousands of years older than the site. So these aren't things that were left 1,000 years earlier at the site. These are things that the people living 1,000 years ago acquired themselves or found themselves and reincorporated into their culture. They have this strong connection to the past and they're reincorporating these things within it. So we're seeing these archaic points and these woodland points that are being recycled and reused. And a lot of times when we see them, it's not in everyday context. It's in ritual context. It's in mound context. So they're probably using them as historical reference to their ancestors and are using them in ceremonies and they go into the mounds. All right. So this becomes an important thing for them to make a connection to the deep, deep past. All right. And then we're getting quartz crystals, which are coming from the Appalachian Mountains. We're getting pieces of basalt that are here. A lot of times these may not be complete, but they're large sections of something from a distant land, right? And in some of these, like the one to the left, you can't see it, but it is chock full of all that red coloring from them using it to grind the hematite, the ochre, the red pigment down. And then we have the Cahokia points. These points are from Cahokia. So right now in Florida, there have only been 4 Cahokia points found. None found in Georgia, none found in Alabama. You have to go all the way to the Mississippi River to start finding these. But we have 3 of them in this guy's front yard here in Jacksonville. That one to the right was found by C.B. Moore at Mount Royal near Willatka. Okay. So we have these, and we've had archaeologists from Cahokia look at them. They're made out of Burlington chert. They're incredible workmanship. They're razor thin. They are so, so thin. This one here has just been worked down a lot, but it started out this big, but it's been reused, and that's the size of it now. So we have one that's called a preform, that it hasn't been notched yet. We have one that has the notch in it. This one actually has 3-corner notches. And then we have one that's used. So we have these here. It's incredible. We're getting copper. All right. So these are little scrap pieces of copper. Okay. They're crumpled, they're broken, they're folded. Some are rolled into beads. Okay. Other ones are just like this. These were probably taken and they were going to use these as foil to put around shell or to put around some locally produced material. So again, this looks like some sort of ritual workshop. We're also getting abraders and small little stones that they're using to make these things and to grind these things and to abrade these things. So all these things are found in this Kinsey Knoll area. We're not finding it anywhere else in the site, anywhere else in the region. All right. Then we're getting pottery. Within that little core area, probably maybe 20, 22 units, we probably have 15, almost 20,000 sherds, broken pieces of pottery. Some of these things are huge. Some of them in the middle part of it show little wear and tear. So they're probably being made for rituals, being left there and basically staying in great shape. So we have some that have the red filming on it or that ochre that you see. And a lot of times we'll see a lot of them that just have little patches of it, probably from them working the hematite. We're getting plain, we're getting check stamp. We're getting what we call these incised, we call them fine wares. Most of these can be kind of mass produced. They're taking a paddle and they're stamping them. Other ones, they're having to come in and size them, do little punctations, press either a stylus into it to make holes. These here are being made with the edge of a shell. So it's much more labor intensive. Usually they're really smooth as well. So we think these are fine wares. So we're seeing much more of these at the Kinsey's Knoll than in elsewhere. So the size of the quantity of these pottery, all suggesting something different is going on here. The fact that we're finding these exotic materials reinforces that. All right. We just found this last year. And this is a large pottery adorno, an effigy. So this is a bird that would have been on the top of a pot. And so it's one of them, but just showing you 3 different views. But you can see a nice, the eye here, the beak here, head on, and the side view. You can see that's where it would have been attached to the pot. And this is locally made. So this is St. John's pottery. We have another one, a little more cruder, but it's probably some sort of canid, like a dog or a fox and something like that. So we have this pottery that has this unique shape to it, these effigy adornos on them. Excuse me. Then we're also getting this other pottery. This is kind of regular looking pottery. It's got cord marking on it. So what it is they're taking twine. They're probably taking sable palm trees, getting the fibrous material there and making cordage, right? Then they're taking that cordage and they're probably wrapping it around like a dowel. And then they roll that across the wet clay and it leaves these cord impressions. All right. So we know this pottery and we thought, you know what, this pottery looks a lot like the pottery that's found right here. But we thought, is it from there? They could just know about it and just be emulating it themselves. So it's just a copyware. So what we've done here is we've had neutron activation analysis done. So basically we've sent it to University of Missouri. They take a small sample, they bombard it with radiation. They look at all the radioactive elements that are in there. They measure those and they look for the trace elements and they basically get a mineralogical composition of the clay. And by doing that, they can start looking at, hey, is this a local clay or a non-local clay? And what we're finding out here is that this pottery here basically is either being made locally or it's being imported in. But when we look at it, even on a microscope, we can't tell. It is exactly the same looking. It's only at the chemical or elemental level can we really identify that. And when we do, we can see that some of this stuff is really going in. So what it is we had this sample that was taken of clays and potteries all over this area. And Neil Wallace, who's at the University of Florida, is doing a lot for other areas. So we'll be able to create this huge database to start looking at this. And it is showing us, based on what we have, about 40% of what we've been able to test shows up that it's locally made. About 25% shows that it's non-locally made. And the other 35 or 40%, we can't tell. So it's unclear. So we are getting empirical evidence that it's coming in from that area. Another thing we do, just to give an idea if they're different clay sources, is we do refiring projects, right? So we'll take this. This is one sherd, a broken piece of pottery that we have. So we take it and then we put it in a kiln and then we fire it to a temperature higher than it's ever been fired before. And we fire all our samples to that level. So now they're at the same level. They're not affected by cooking and things that went on. They're at this much higher level. And then we can compare their colorings. And that can let us know the amount of iron that's in the clay. So it won't tell us that they're exactly the same source, but they can tell us, hey, these are completely different clay sources. So it can give us an idea of where things are coming from, where they're going. And it's a lot more complicated than it looks at the eye level. So it's able us to really start tracking movements that's going on. In terms of the animal bones, the amount of animal bones we're getting is just off the charts. It is so much, and that's why we think feasting is going on. We're getting this great preservation because of the shell that's out there. But we're getting the everyday things. Everything you would expect to catch today, they're catching as well. From mullet to sea trout to sheep's head, redfish, flounder, catfish, all of those things in large numbers, incredible numbers. All right, mostly catching smaller ones. So what they're probably doing is going out into the marshes, getting mass capture techniques, wares, fish nets, those types of things, generating really large numbers of them. We're also getting deer. So the amount of deer we have in Kinsey's Knoll is more than we have anywhere else. We're digging more there, but the ratio is off the charts. So they're eating a lot of deer in that one area, or at least throwing it away in that area. But we're also getting bear and panther, bobcat, mink, fox, river otter, dolphin, shark, all of these things. So it's just really unusual things that we're getting as well. All right. So this is not a typical bone profile. Even in other everyday garbage areas where we have great preservation, we're not getting these materials. Okay. So something is different here. So we have different in terms of pottery. We have it different in terms of exotic items. We have it different in terms of the quantity, quality, and types of animal bones that are being discarded here. All right. Lots and lots of oyster shell. One thing we wanted to do is, hey, can we start looking at what's going on here throughout the year? Are they in the site all year round? Are they just coming to the site during certain times of the year, during certain kind of celestial events? What's going on? The faunal, okay, the animal bone, the fish are all suggesting they're there throughout the year. So we started to look at, hey, what about oysters? There's so many oysters out there, okay? The way we tried to get to seasonality here with oyster is by looking at this little thing here. It's called an impressed otostone. So it's a little parasite that attaches itself to the oyster, all right? So when the Native Americans collect it and they bring it and they start to steam things or throw them away, these things will fall off, okay? What's great about them is they only live about a year and they have the same life cycle throughout the year. So when we find them, we know that they died when the oyster died because they were attached to the oyster. Okay, if they had been dead, they couldn't be attached to the oyster. So they become a proxy for the season that the oyster died. So we measure these, we look at their modal distribution, and what we're starting to see at this site is that they're probably collecting these oysters mostly from September to April. So maybe late fall, spring, late fall, winter, and into the very, very early spring, not much for the summer. So it kind of follows our Western adage of not eating them during those warmer kind of months. We'll see clams being eaten at other times in the summer and so forth. So we're starting to see they are here throughout the year, but they are selecting or targeting different resources at different times of the year. All right. And one of the last things here is we start to see that not only do they have a great interest in things from a great distance away, from Cahokia, from the Appalachian Mountains, from Lake Superior, they also have an interest in things from the deep past, as I mentioned before. And so we see a lot of things in ceremonial contexts that are from deep periods of time. And some of these, they probably had to dig into mounds themselves to get. But we get these archaic banner stones. Ken Sassaman may have talked about that when he talked about the archaic. We're getting these woodland period elbow pipes. That is a turkey tail, so that's probably 4,000 years ago. So again, we're getting all of these really old materials in ritual context. So what I think to be kind of St. John's too at this point in time, it really relied on the community's ability to span vast areas in deep time, right? They had to cultivate relationships with people at a great distance away. They had to cultivate relationships with ancestors into the deep past. So they're finding these things, they're collecting these things, and they're basically helping to kind of, I think by acquiring them, by using them, by burying them, they're actually forging a connection to the deep past. They're trying to create this continuum that brings the past to the present. And then they have these physical tokens, of their ancestors. They embody the past. And so these things are probably animated and powerful, both the things coming from great distance as well as the things coming from the deep past. So this is a big part of who they are at this point in time. All right. Real quick, going back to Cahokia. So let's kind of circle back to that bigger picture with Cahokia. So these are some of the things that are found from Cahokia that are considered to be kind of calling cards. These are things that people believe are made at Cahokia. So all these people are kind of coalesced to Cahokia. You get these incredible population. After that starts going, you start seeing people move out, a diaspora from Cahokia out to other areas, either to live into those areas or visit those areas. So you see all these things from Cahokia going up and down the Mississippi River. But then there's really nothing in this area. Then all of a sudden, you're going to see stuff in artsy sites in Florida. All right. So we get things. This is probably a H-O-E, farming from Cahokia that's in our area. There's our points, Cahokia points. There are the ear spools that everyone is convinced are being made at Cahokia. We have the long-nosed god masks, which are coming from Cahokia. So why do a bunch of fisher folks, shellfish collectors in Jacksonville, Florida, who aren't farmers, who probably don't have as much hierarchy and social inequality as we see in the interior, how are they getting them? Why are they here? All right. So when I talked about, this is a reproduction, this shows you what it looks like. So again, these are probably, this big. Okay. They were worn in the ears, got these long noses that are on there. Again, made out of copper that's basically being riveted and hard hammered together, maybe with a little bit of heat, right? And there they are. So 7 pairs have been found. Everyone is convinced they're being made right here. So if you look at their distribution, on the edge, on the edge, on the edge, on the edge, that these things are going out into far-flung areas. So Tim Pocketet, who is been working at Cahokia, really thinks that these are part of kind of alliance building materials, okay? That basically people who acquire these are forever kind of linked to Cahokia. So there are probably these diasporas, these individuals who are going out over great distances and meeting these areas and basically going. So what we have is Cahokia. So everyone used to think, okay, the way that these things got to Jacksonville, it's a bunch of intermediaries. One group traded with another group, who 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 traded with another group, and eventually it made it here. So what that implies is the people in Cahokia and the people in northeastern Florida never, ever interacted with one another. It was a bunch of middlemen traders in between that did it. To see that, you would expect a fall off curve, right? A lot of that stuff at the source and less and less and less and less and less and the least amount the farthest away. We have the direct opposite of that. We have the more of the stuff farther away and hardly anything in between. So we argue now that there are direct connections now between Cahokia and northeastern Florida. Still unclear is it people from northeastern Florida going to Cahokia, people from Cahokia going to northeastern Florida. They're not coming here and living. Okay, so all we see are these artifacts here within local context. So it's not like a group of people moving in and staying and enjoying the Florida sunshine. It's something different than that. All right. From a Cahokia standpoint, what's going on here? They said this is probably going to be a 150 to 200-day journey, round trip journey to go from Cahokia to northeastern Florida. But if you think about it, they go to northeastern Florida, or at least to the eastern seaboard, they will see the edge of the world. They believe that is truly the edge of the world. So at the edge of the world, what are they going to find? They'll find shells, things that they're not used to. They'll find Yopan holly. Yopan holly is used to make the black drink. Vessels, cups at Cahokia, in which they've done residue testing, shows Ilex vomitoria within that. Lightning whelk, shark teeth, all these coastal resources are here, right? Other thing that is here, they can see the sun basically rise, from the great waters. It's got to be an awe-inspiring experience. So probably individuals, whether they're would-be leaders, shaman, whatever it is, may make these long distance journeys to these faraway lands and bring back things, establish connections with peoples in those areas. Or alternatively, we could also have people from northeastern Florida hearing about the great center of Cahokia and wanting to see it for themselves. So we can see pilgrimages going there. Cahokia is now being seen as a place of great pilgrimages. So these people are moving across the landscape. One thing that we haven't done, but we can draw upon, is that we know that in the past, people have done isotopic analysis on human bone. And we see individuals that are buried in mounds in Florida actually spent their formative years in the Appalachian Mountains, farther away, in Tennessee, in those areas. So people are moving across the landscape. People used to think, oh, they're not moving that far. There's not that much going on. We know from the accounts of DeSoto and others that there are individuals who have vast knowledge and go over great distances here. So these could be priests. These could be would-be leaders. These could be other individuals who are taking these journeys to these areas, proselytizing, alliance building, acquiring these exotic materials. A lot of times we look at things that distances for groups like this can be couched in cosmological terms, right? So sometimes this piece of mica, this piece of quartz, they're not just pieces of those places, they're pieces of the cosmology. They're pieces of the cosmos that are going on. So these things are probably incredibly potent. They're animated. They can be bundled together. They can help to summon their ancestors and all these types of things. So they're playing these important roles within these kind of locations. So I think just because we had a bunch of shellfish collectors, fisher folks in Jacksonville, Florida, it doesn't mean that they were sequestered to the tidal marshes, that they were actually part of these incredible interaction networks. What happens, Cahokia kind of implodes, it breaks down, the interaction networks will break down, and the connection we see from Northeast Florida to the Mississippi world kind of disappears. And the conduit after 1300 is going to be the Chattahoochee River, the Apalachicola River. Then you're going to see Etowah. Then you're going to see Moundville, and it kind of moves more towards that area. It was there before, but it was smaller, much larger, I think, in ours. Now it's going to be the reverse. And the groups that come to our area after 1300, we don't see all that exotic material coming in anymore. So those Timucua Indians, those Macama that meet the French and the Spanish, they're not involved in those far-flung interaction networks. So really, while we have these kind of broad kind of evolutionary ideas of how things get more complex and get larger and people don't move around as much, when we really start looking at things at the local levels, those histories, it's really, 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 really different. All right. So I think I'm going to end there. I just want to thank all these great students that I have. I get to be a mouthpiece a lot of times for all the great work that students do, including Victoria and other UNF students. I don't think sometimes they realize the impact that they make in the lab. So thank you.
Thank you so much for a fascinating lecture. I'm gonna, yeah, okay, but I've got to ask my question first. Okay, so there was this movement, presumably of artifacts, and people as well as artifacts, but what was going back to Cahokia? And I'm thinking, is it possible that they were drying and salting fish since it was such a fertile area for the fishing that they could have been taking fish back north?
It could be sometimes we don't, if they were flaying, we don't have the bones, but it's probably gonna be coastal resources. It's gonna be shells. We know that in Cahokia, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of shell beads that are basically whelks that are coming from the
Mhm.
coast. The Ilex vomitoria with black drink, Yopon holly that only grows in coastal sectors, shark's teeth, all these things. So coastal resources. Another thing that we have that may not be there would be various types of feathers and things like that from certain types of birds, but we don't get those in the archaeological record.
Right, so it's
But there's also,
possible.
maybe there's also going to be things like stories and things about the great waters and what's
Mhm.
happening down there that they can bring back with them. What they can come back with is all this kind of esoteric knowledge that increases their powers.
Great. So, okay,
I just wondered if you found any coprolites in this area.
We have. So coprolites are kind of fossilized species. It doesn't sound as bad, I think, but you can get great stuff from them. One of the things that we have is some of the fish. There are these small killifish, tiny fish like minnows and stuff like that. We know that they're eating those bones and all because they basically get the bones in their system and so forth. But we don't have any corn or anything like that in the coprolites. But we get it just kind of reinforces what we kind of know from the subsistence animal bone.
Very interesting. I was just wondering, is there any evidence for them interacting with other groups in Florida as well as with the Cahokia?
So right now we see a few things that are coming from the coast. I mean, from the Panhandle, like the Tallahassee area, but not a lot. We see a little bit coming from the south, but not South Florida. At one time, we had found queen conch. So queen conch are these conchs that are from either from the Caribbean or they're from really far South Florida. So we had two great ones, but it was found in the 1960s, and there was some construction going on, and so we ended up dating them, and we ended up coming back with a date of the 1700s. And we also now know there was a British little site there, and so it was probably brought by the British to the area. And so it's not from South Florida. So we don't have as much from South Florida or those areas as we would expect.
This person by the name of Moore, who was excavating here in the 1890s, I believe you said, do you have whatever he picked up, the artifacts or whatever he might have found there?
Yeah, so he was a really wealthy Philadelphia kind of socialite. And so beginning in like 1894, he started to go to Florida in the summers. And eventually he goes throughout the Southeast United States until about 1920, hitting most applicable waterways. So a lot of those materials, he would went back to Philadelphia. Eventually, a lot of them now are at the National Museum of the American Indian. So.
I have a question here too. Paul Parker, go ahead.
Yeah, oh, that was just fabulous. Really enlightening us about what is very close to us here in Gainesville that has such deep meaning in terms of the earliest history of this area. But I'm wondering whether the absence of a whole lot of connection with Central and South Florida cultures and tribal groups is not because they were heavily influenced by major tribal groups in the Caribbean, where their trade and other kinds of activities and interactions might have been much more vigorous than we are able to see today.
Yeah, right now,
Tiano, the others that inhabited the Caribbean islands.
yes. So Taino, so we see probably connections to South Florida and maybe the Caribbean, but not where we are. One thing that the neutron activation analysis could potentially show us looking at the chemical level, and in one instance is there is all this pottery that really looks the same. This isn't here. This is basically another project that the University of Florida has done. And when they started looking at the pottery at that chemical level, what they thought was all similar looking pottery was actually being made on clay sources that were coming from South Florida, that were coming from the Panhandle, that were coming from local areas. So it's there. Sometimes we just don't see it at our general levels. It's got to take some degree of technology for us to get to that sourcing.
Yes. Thank you again.
When was the black, what's the evidence for when the black drink was first used? And do they brew it from the berries or the leaves?
So they're parching it with the leaves. So basically it's Yopan holly. You see it around here. So they take and they make a tea out of it. The British would do it when they were here. They called it poor man's tea when they couldn't get enough coming in from Europe. So they take it in purging. So we start to see certain kind of cups that may have been made for that, and the residues are in there. So it's probably, at least a couple thousand years is the earliest we start to think maybe it's happening. Couple of the historic accounts, and they use it to purge themselves. So they're drinking this, they heat it, drink it in large amounts, and then they cleanse themselves, they purge. So it's a medic. But so a couple of the accounts we see that he used salt water. So that probably helps to get it back up. It was probably something that they're drinking. And typically, it was only in these ceremonial contexts that they would do it. So it has a really strong kind of ceremonial ritual connotation to it.
Yeah, I read it was used to prepare themselves for battle.
Yeah, that was part of the purging cleansing
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
Thank you for a great survey of about a millennium in this area, heading west and north a bit. But how about civilizations up, say, the Hudson River, the Mohawk River, out into Lake Ontario, Lake Erie? Are these contemporary, and do they mix together and that sort of thing?
So you may see more connections between those groups in the Northeast and groups that are up by Cahokia in those areas. Where we are, no, we're not seeing any of that connection. So you're probably going to see some of those groups that are up in the Ohio River Valley having connections to the Northeast, but we don't see anything from there. So we don't have anything like obsidian that's coming away from the west or any great distances away. Like I said, probably the thing we're getting the furthest away would be some of the copper. So.
Excuse me. I'll go over to Ann first.
Do you personally have any involvement or knowledge of the Midden Mounds that were found in a place called Hammock Dunes, which is on the Barrier Island east of Palm Coast?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, that's undisturbed. It's on the private property and they can't touch it. That's
Huh.
why I asked. And I have one other quick question. Have you found in your mounds any jewelry such as a nose ring that was more common in Central and South America? Did that style travel up this far?
No, and just to clarify, we're not digging, in the actual mounds themselves. We're digging mounded areas of shell, but not actual burial mounds. So no, we don't see anything like that. There probably would have been kind of plugs and things like that for the ears, but nothing for the nose that I know of.
Thank you.
So you're avoiding the mounds because you've identified them as being burial mounds?
Yes, and there's
And that
legality,
because of
legalities in
Niagara.
place. And
Yeah,
plus, we just don't want to show disrespect for indigenous nations today.
Right.
So that's why we're not trying to show any of the actual burial goods themselves. We've moved towards line drawings and replicas.
Do you have any, are there any artifacts in our Museum of Science here in Gainesville that are related to the things that you're finding now? Do we have anything in our museum?
So here in Gainesville, that's coming from Jacksonville, or that's basically from this area that's comparable to what we're.
I wasn't sure. They have a science area. And I haven't been there for a while looking at that. So I'll go back and look
Okay.
and see and think about and maybe ask.
Yeah, but I don't know, the groups that are living in the Gainesville area at this time, 1,000 years ago, they're not acquiring a lot of that exotic material that's coming in. We don't see that here in the Gainesville area at that point in time.
Okay, well, the museum here gave our museum in Micanopy a few artifacts. And so we have some early things. But I don't know how early they are.
Okay, yeah.
I have one more here on Zoom, if you'll permit,
Okay.
Phyllis. At one time, I was volunteering in the ethnographic collection, the storage areas for the Museum of Natural History in Gainesville. They have an enormous collection that they don't have the facility to display here. I don't know that it has anything from Cahokia or the Mississippian culture. I don't remember that specifically. It depends on largely a lot of things that are donated. Yeah.
Okay, Antoinette Wallace, go ahead.
Hi, Keith. In your Kinsey Knoll ritual area, did you find any evidence for paint stones that they might have used for ritual body decoration?
No, unfortunately, no stones or anything like that. We have the evidence of pigments being used and probably mixed, but in terms of what they're using them for, we're not sure, but no stones.
But have some pigments other than ochre?
We have a little bit of limonite, so a little bit of the yellow, but not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but mainly it's going to be red. Red's pretty much it in terms of what we have either adhering to, sometimes on shells, sometimes on pottery. A little bit, very, very little limonite, but mostly it's red ochre.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm very interested.